Panama, a country located on a narrow isthmus washed by the waters of the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. It is a country that attracts tourists with its pristine nature, impenetrable jungles, tropical beaches where summer rains all year round, high volcanoes, lost worlds, inhabited by Indians who adhere to their cultural values, and cosmopolitan city with skyscrapers and financial centers. This is where the two women traveled, Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, who never returned home. What happened to them? Let's find out. The tragic event took place on April 1st, 2014, and soon publications about the incident appeared in the Panamanian press, and then in the media of other countries of the world community. Some may have a fair question, well, what is so mysterious here? Indeed, there are many examples of mysterious disappearances of tourists in various exotic corners of the world. Someone was found alive by rescue teams, in some cases found skeletal remains of a lost person, which proved the death of the traveler from natural conditions. For example, from injuries, from hunger or dehydration, from the loss of physical and mental ability to resist the forces of nature, including predatory animals or various insects, by the way. The bites of some of them are extremely painful and can even cause intoxication of the human body with fatal outcome for him. Sometimes, nothing was found at all. In this case, the disappeared person was recognized as missing, usually forever. In the story related to the disappearance of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, a lot of contradictory, hard to explain facts, the presence of which make it difficult to make a definite conclusion about the specific place of their death and the true cause of their death. Even experts of the criminal police and specialized search teams of the state of the Netherlands were involved in the investigation of the girl's disappearance. There are several versions of the death of the two young ladies in the boundless jungle sea of the country of Panama. The first and official one is that they got lost and died. The second, they were killed by a maniac. The third were liquidated by unknown persons to take possession of the girl's internal organs for sale. Fourth, they were kidnapped to be sold into sexual slavery. Another version of the girl's disappearance is a banal robbery accompanied by murder, and this crime was most likely committed by a small group of people. It is possible that Kris and Lisanne were raped. Logically, the perpetrators had to kill them. If the young women had been left alive, they would have been able to tell the police later who carried out the daring attack. We, in this video, based on the analysis of information presented in the blog coudecas.blogspot.com, in the Panamanian press, as well as on a careful study of the facts that have recently appeared in the media of the world, including the internet, offers a chronologically systematized and logically justified reconstruction of the tragic events. The following explanations should be made. The video will refer to Panamanian time. The research of the mysterious history is based only on reliable facts known to date and confirmed by investigative or other materials. Various assumptions without objective substantiation are not considered in this publication. Meet Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. Lisanne has reached the age of 22, was 184 centimeters tall, had light brown hair and brown eye color. The second girl, Kris, is 21 years old. Hair shade light red, eyes blue, height according to various sources was 167-172 centimeters. Both were attractive individuals graduating from a higher educational institution. The girls met during their part-time employment in a cafe in the Dutch city of Amersfoort. This is a common small, legitimate business common among students in Europe and the United States. A friendly relationship developed between the girls. Kris told her friend about the trip to Peru she had made earlier with her parents and the great impression this Latin American continent had made on her mind. Lisanne was intrigued, and when Kris suggested that she travel to the Republic of Panama for a vacation, combining it with learning Spanish and doing volunteer work, Frohn gladly agreed. Of course, all of these activities were carefully planned and through a travel agency, taking into account the wishes of the girls. They were invited to visit Bocas del Toro in the province of Bocas del Toro and Bajo Bocay in the province of Chiriqui. The contract was awarded and fully paid, but no one knew at the time that it would be a one-way ticket. On March 15, 2014, a small photo shoot took place at the Amsterdam airport before the plane left. Photos from the archives of the people who saw the girls off on their trip. Hello, Panama. The airplane has safely crossed the Atlantic Ocean, flying from Amsterdam, Netherlands to San Jose, Costa Rica. The flight time was 11 hours and 40 minutes. From the landing airport, the girls headed to the small Panamanian town of Almirante, located on the Caribbean coast. Naturally, they had to cross the border separating Costa Rica and Panama, but for people living in European countries, there is visa-free travel between these two Latin American countries. From the town of Almirante, there is a water cab that runs daily every hour from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. This is a boat or ferry that takes tourists who wish to vacation at the various beaches of the Bocas del Toro archipelago. The girls used one of these vehicles, and in 20 minutes found themselves in a paradise corner of the world on the island of Colón, the administrative center of which is the city of Bocas del Toro. Staying in this place from March 16th to March 29th was part of the young women's plans. First of all, there is a Spanish language school there called Spanish by the Sea, where the girls were to take their initial course. Second, they wanted to enjoy the sunny weather and warm ocean water before their trip to the town of Bocay, which is located far from the ocean coast. 5 kilometers away from this community at the entrance to the village of Palmira is the Spanish by the River Bocate School, whose mailing address is Palmira, Entrega General, 0 Bocate, Panama. It is a branch of the Spanish by the Sea Corporation. It was there that the girls were to continue learning Spanish and doing volunteer work in the village community. Every day the girls called their parents on their cell phones, sharing their impressions and plans, a fact confirmed by the testimony of relatives during the investigation. Undoubtedly, the girls took numerous photographs using their cell phones and digital camera, but this information would not be available until June 2014, 2 months after Kris and Lisanne's disappearance. For a better understanding of the events that preceded the girls' disappearance, let us present some photos that documented the young women's vacation on the Atlantic coast. Each young woman had a notebook in which the main events of the past days were recorded. These documents were found by the police in Kris and Lisanne's room after their disappearance. The texts are written in Dutch, but there is an English translation. Kris's notebook shows that both friends arrived in the city of Bocate on March 29th. According to the contract, the further process of learning Spanish and the girls' volunteer activities were to begin on April 1st, 2014. The school administration booked a room for the young women to stay in a private house. It was an apartment with a separate entrance, and Kris and Lisanne were given a key to the door. The house belonged to a woman whose name was Miriam. According to her testimony, the two had a good relationship. The Spanish language school was located almost a few dozen meters from where the girls lived. The young women visited the school to inform the manager of the educational institution of their arrival to study and to agree on a schedule for attending classes. Then on March 29th and March 30th, Kris and Lisanne got acquainted with the surroundings of the place where they settled and also visited the town of Bocate. The Pianist's Trail, which leads to the top of an elevation that has no official geographical name and is 1,852 meters above sea level, was of particular interest to the travelers. The locals call it Mirador Mountain, which means observation deck in Spanish, and there is indeed a small flat meadow created by nature from which tourists can enjoy a marvelous view of the surrounding landscape. In addition, there are enchanting waterfalls near the said elevation. However, the girls were warned that excursions to any of these attractions should be made only in the company of a local guide, a professional tourist guide. Based on the tragedy that occurred, Kris and Lisanne did not follow this advice. March 31st, 2014. Morning and afternoon. It was Monday, and the day's events are reconstructed based on Kris and Lisanne's diary entries. After breakfast, the young women made their way to the orphanage located in the village of Palmyra to introduce themselves and agree on the schedule and scope of their volunteer work, which was to begin on the 1st of April. It was a logical decision, and any sane person would have done the same. There they were met unfriendly and even hostile by a woman. She said that it was not possible to provide work for the young people. The frustrated girls returned to their room, and then they decided to head to the Spanish language school to check with the head of the center and volunteer coordinator. Mrs. Marjolaine was shocked by the girls' message and offered to arrange for them to work on another project. The young women agreed to this option, but needed time to reissue their authorization documents. Marjolaine inquired about the girls' plans during their forced unemployment. Kris and Lisanne replied that they would like to make several excursions to visit the summit of the extinct volcano Buru, the observation deck on Mirador, and the magnificent waterfalls in its vicinity. The school leader, knowing the dangers of traveling in the jungle, gave them a business card of a local guide, which was found by the police in Kris and Lisanne's room after their disappearance. His name is Feliciano. The cost of the guide's services, depending on the difficulty of the route, was up to us $45 at the time. The young women thanked the female Spanish tutor at the school, who guaranteed to arrange for them to meet Signor Feliciano on campus at 9 o'clock on the morning of April 2nd to schedule their excursions. In addition, the young women requested permission to use the computer lab to familiarize themselves with the routes of the upcoming hikes. Kris and Lisanne then left the school building at 1:10 p.m. on April 2nd. The girls had plenty of free time and decided to see where the Sendero el Pianista trail was located. At 1:40 p.m., Leonardo Arturo Gonzalez, a cab driver, took the girls to a roadside cafe near the trail. At this point, they parted ways. Leonardo subsequently provided additional information to the police. According to him, when he stopped the car near the girls hitchhiking, in the cabin of his cab were two young men of Panamanian nationality. By the way, in Panama, a cab driver, without asking the consent of his clients, can stop the vehicle at any time to pick up hitchhikers. Business is business. Leonardo, who knew English to the extent of his professional activities, asked the standard question, "Where are the young ladies going?" They introduced themselves, "I am Kris. My name is Lisanne," and then answered him in Spanish, "Sendero el Pianista." The Pianista Trail. This destination was in the direction of the cab route, and the driver said okay. Kris placed herself in the front passenger seat next to Leonardo. Lisanne was forced to sit in the back of the car's interior, next to the Panamanian. The young cab driver, then 33 years old, fascinated by the presence of the European women, continued to talk during the ride, a natural inclination for temperamental Panamanian drivers. Kris tried to communicate with him in Spanish because it was a practical opportunity to use the elementary knowledge of this language she had acquired at the Spanish by the Sea School in Bocas del Toro. The young woman, not being cautious when talking to a stranger, explained to Leonardo that she and Lisanne wanted to find out where the Sendero el Pianista trail was so that they could do some hiking. And tomorrow morning, April 1st, the friends planned to hike the trail to a lookout point located at the top of the mountain, which locals call Mirador. Certainly the two unidentified Panamanians in the back of the cab heard this information. They may well have had a criminal intent against the girls. From Leonardo's subsequent testimony at the police station, it appears that the two young men left his car before Kris and Lisanne. He then took the girls to Café El Pianista and never saw them again. The cab driver also said that he did not know the male passengers. However, it is possible that these men were known to him, and Leonardo deliberately kept silent about this because they were members of a local criminal group linked to the mafia, and the cab driver feared for his life. He realized that there was a real threat of his destruction as an unwanted witness, and the cab driver's fears were not in vain. 11 months after the disappearance of the young women, Leonardo tragically died under mysterious circumstances at the age of 34. Perhaps the active actions of journalists and independent experts who sought to reopen the investigation, which had already been closed by that time, provoked criminal structures to liquidate the cab driver. Moreover, the police allowed the possibility of additional investigation. Café El Pianista. The cafe is still in existence today. There, tourists are offered great tasting and reasonably priced Panamanian food before the arduous climb to the Mirador. In addition, a large selection of food packaged in airtight packages is always available for travelers. On that day, March 31st, 2014, Giovanni, the owner of the cafe, an Italian, happily greeted the customers, Kris and Lisanne. However, he was surprised by the girls' desire to hike the Sendero Pianista trail without a guide. They reassured him by saying that they would only walk in that direction out of curiosity, but would not invade the jungle. According to the owner of the restaurant business, he provided the young women with his dog. It often performed the function of escorting tourists. After a while, the animal returned, but without the girls. This happened after about an hour and a half, which corresponds to the time it took to travel along the Sendero Pianista trail to the jungle and back, that is, 90 minutes. Giovanni did not worry, thinking that Kris and Lisanne had gone to their place of residence after the walk. There is also the testimony of the manager of the local equestrian center. It follows that he saw the two girls that day at around 4 p.m. They were sweaty and hyped up. However, the witness was not sure that it was exactly Kris and Lisanne. The young women were walking towards the nearest bus stop, apparently to leave on public or hitchhiking transportation. March 31st, 2014. Evening. Miriam's house. It was established that at 1800 hours Kris and Lisanne were at a massage session. At 8:30 p.m., they returned to their apartment, and according to the homeowner's testimony, she and both girls had dinner together that evening. Now follows additional and compelling evidence that Kris and Lisanne spent the night at Miriam's house on March 31st. The young women's notebooks describe the same unpleasant events of the previous day, but under different dates. But there is no contradiction here. On the contrary, there is an objective explanation. Lisanne made an entry in her diary in the late evening of March 31st. Then the girl fell asleep. Kris made a similarly meaningful entry in her diary when it was already the 1st of April, so that is the date she gave. Now for the most important thing that follows from Kris's notebook. She wrote, "Let there be hope for another volunteer project, but for now we will go to the Panama flows." This is, first, irrefutable confirmation of the young women's planned journey to the summit of the local mountain Mirador on April 1st, 2014. Second, the absence of mentioning the guide's name in the diaries of both girls indicates that the participation of this professional guide in the upcoming excursion was excluded. Perhaps they decided to save money and travel the route on their own, using a map. April 1st, 2014, Tuesday. The homeowner told police that she made the girls breakfast in the morning and left for work. When the woman returned after a day of work, around 4 p.m. she found that Kris and Lisanne had eaten breakfast, but they did not appear in their room in the evening. Miriam became concerned and asked her daughter about the girls, who said she had seen the young women leave the house in the morning, wearing very light clothing, and one of the girls carrying a small bag. This fact leads to a clear conclusion: the last person who saw Kris and Lisanne alive on April 1st, 2014 was the daughter of the owner of the house, and the proof of the truth of her words is the bag found later, which turned out to be a backpack belonging to one of the missing girls, Lisanne. Later that evening, Miriam suggested that perhaps the young women had decided to spend the evening in the company of friends, and she, reassured by this reasoning, went to bed. April 3rd, 2014, Thursday. The police inspected and photographed the young women's room. Guide Feliciano hiked the Sendero El Pianista trail to a lookout point on Mount Mirador the same day, but found no trace of the girls, he said. Panamanian professional rescue units were involved in the search for Kris and Lisanne. Later, a search team from the Netherlands was dispatched to search for the missing young women. Much volunteer help was provided by local professional guides. By April 8th, 25 trails had been checked, but no girls or traces of them were found. The search continued. 2 months after the disappearance of Kris and Lisanne, the first clue was found. June 11th, 2014, Wednesday. Near this settlement, located in the province of Bocas del Toro near the border with the province of Chiriqui, a local woman found a backpack in one of the rice paddies. She worked daily in these rice plantations and therefore categorically told the police that the bag was not there on June 10th. According to the woman, the backpack and the belongings inside it found on June 11th were completely dry, despite the fact that the rainy season had already started in the said region at that time. She took the find to her house, where naturally she inquired with her family members about the contents of the bag. The event was no secret to the residents of the small settlement, and some of them came to the woman's house out of curiosity and most likely touched the discovered items. On Thursday, June 12th, law enforcement authorities in the city of Bocade received information about the found backpack. On Friday, June 13th, the first senior prosecutor of the city, Betsaida Pitti, who was in charge of the investigation into the disappearance of the girls, arrived by helicopter, accompanied by experts, in the settlement of Altos del Romero. The experts examined the bag and the items it contained. On the outer surface of the fabric of the backpack were found minor traces of contamination from soil and vegetation. Inside it were present 2 bras, neatly stacked, and also had weak traces of plant origin, 2 pairs of sunglasses, an empty plastic water bottle, $83, a digital camera Canon SX270HS, smartphone Samsung Galaxy and iPhone 4. However, most importantly, Lisanne's passport and Kris's insurance policy were present in the bag, and this circumstance unequivocally confirmed the belonging of the found items to the disappeared girls. All this material evidence was immediately seized by the experts for a more thorough examination. Subsequently, 34 fingerprints of unknown people were found, 13 on the surface of the fabric of the backpack, 6 on the bras of the girls, 12 on smartphones and a digital camera. And now the shocking fact. These 3 gadgets were wrapped with tape with an adhesive layer, and 3 more fingerprints were found on it. Based on the testimony of the parents of the missing young women, it was determined that the iPhone 4 smartphone belonged to Kris, the digital camera and Samsung Galaxy smartphone belonged to Lisanne. Specialists managed to get important information from them. First, photos that proved the girls' journey along the Pianista trail to the top of the local Mirador Mountain on April 1st, 2014. Second, the times the smartphones were turned on and the specific numbers of outgoing calls made by the young women and 90 photographs taken with a digital camera on the night of April 8th, 2014 were also discovered. The Pianist Trail, Sendero El Pianista. The trail can be roughly divided into 3 sections. The first is a dirt road, even suitable for vehicular traffic. On both sides of it are pastures for domestic animals, and to prevent them from crossing the road, wire fence posts are placed along the sides of the path. This first leg of the journey will take 45 minutes on foot. The first section of the trail ends before the jungle. If you have driven there by car, you will have to leave your vehicle and move on using only your feet. The second section of the Sendero El Pianista trail takes 35 to 40 minutes to complete. During the active life of the flora and fauna of the Panamanian jungle, you gradually enter a wonderful, divine world where birds are singing and butterflies of shocking colors are flying. There is abundant vegetation all around, and in the air there is a stupefying smell of exotic flowers. Soon a bridge appears in front of the traveler. From the comparative analysis of the images, it follows that the photos were taken in different seasonal conditions and from different angles, but the elements of the bridge structure, as well as the location of stones to the right of it near the water stream, are completely the same, which unambiguously proves that the girls were at this crossing on April 1st, 2014 and continued their journey. The most difficult part of the ascent to the viewing platform is the road, which passes through narrow stony ravines. It takes 40 to 45 minutes to traverse this path. There is a photo of this third section of the road taken by one of the girls as they headed to the top of the mountain. Wow, we're at the top. Kris and Lisanne went to the observation deck and had a photo shoot there. From the girls' gadgets, it was determined that the photos were taken between 1 p.m. and 1:06 p.m. From analyzing these images, it is concluded that the photo frames were taken by the girls immediately after they went to the top of Mirador Mountain. Evidence: Kris has not had time to take off her backpack. Lisanne's hair is not yet loose, the same landscape plan. In addition, the shadow of Lisanne's left hand on her clothing t-shirt indicates that the photos were taken by this particular young woman using her smartphone in selfies mode selfie. The Canon SX270HS digital camera does not have a similar function. The girls then continued taking pictures. Having analyzed all the published photos at the top of the mountain, we can confidently assert the emotional state of the girls was cheerful. And most importantly, nothing embarrassed them and did not limit their free behavior in this place. Smiles, fingers raised up, everything is super cool. Therefore, it definitely gives the impression that there were no other people present at the observation deck. However, it was time for homecoming, and then an event occurred that sealed the girls' tragic fate. Kris and Lisanne's fatal mistake. There are two trails leading to the top of Mirador Mountain. The first is the Sendero El Pianista Pianist's path, which the young women took on their journey. The second, unofficially called in the area Caribbean Descent, is the opposite direction to the first and is located on the jungle side of the Bocas del Toro province. Both trails end at a viewpoint, the perimeter of which is surrounded by abundant vegetation. Only an experienced guide could have pointed out the right direction to return home, but there was no such guide with the young women, and after the photo shoot the girls were completely disoriented, and as such, they made a mistake and took the Caribbean Descent Trail. The author of the publication added additional markings in the form of 3 arrows. The red arrow indicates the exit to the observation deck from the Caribbean Descent Trail. The blue arrow indicates the summit of Mirador Mountain. The orange arrow shows the direction of the Caribbean Descent Trail, which is joined by secondary paths leading into the jungle, away from the civilized world. Certainly the girls from Europe did not have Girl Scout skills. Moreover, the initial section of the Caribbean Descent Trail was similar in terrain to the Sendero El Pianista Trail, and for this reason, Kris and Lisanne were confident that they were going to the starting point of their hike. It was quite obvious that Kris was goofing off, not realizing that he was in the gully of the Caribbean Descent Trail. 34 minutes later, a creek appeared in the girls' path. Note there is no smile or fingers raised upward, as there was on the observation deck on the girl's face. Kris's face clearly shows fright, and it was probably caused by the realization that the path chosen by the young women was not the Sendero el Pianista trail, because there was no creek on the way to the Mirador summit. And then another photograph was taken. Frame number IMG 509. The Panamanian police and forensic experts from the Netherlands determined that this photograph had been deleted from a Canon SX270HS digital camera. It was not possible to recover the image using special software. What was recorded on this photo is still unknown, and we can only speculate about the reason for its deletion. The author of the publication has a convincing version of the destruction of the IMG_509 frame. It is the reader's right to agree with it or not, but it is quite plausible. First of all, it follows from the analysis of IMG_507 and IMG_508 frames firstly. The descent is rather steep and rocky secondly. There is no backpack on Kris' back, therefore it was on her friend's back. There is no smartphone or digital camera in Kris's hands, so Lisanne was the one taking the pictures, and no one else could have done it but her. And further, holding the gadget in her hand, Lisanne also started walking down to the creek. She either slipped or stumbled and lost her balance, helped in no small way by the backpack on her back. By the way, in the IMG_507 shot of Kris heading towards the creek, you can see traces of mud on her shorts and legs. She may have also fallen on this steep descent. Lisanne accidentally pressed the shutter button of the Canon SX270HS when she fell. The resulting photo was not quite clear and not intended, which she deleted. The camera's instruction manual has a warning: be careful when deleting images as they cannot be recovered. It is for this reason that the IMG_509 frame has never been recovered by police experts in Panama and the Netherlands, and no one other than Lisanne is implicated in the destruction of the photo. Kris informed her friend that they were lost. The girls made a decision to go back to the top of Mirador Mountain. It is quite a logical act for any person who has lost orientation in the forest, in the mountains, or in any other area, when there is no confidence in the correctness of the chosen path. Kris and Lisanne walked back, and based on the time of the IMG_508 photo, this event occurred around 2 p.m. There is no doubt that they refilled the water from the creek into the plastic bottle they had, because the return trip to the viewpoint and onward home was not a short one. And the rainforest vegetation created a noticeable greenhouse effect that contributed to the loss of moisture and thirst of the human body. The jungle is a labyrinth. There are no road signs there. For this reason, Kris and Lisanne made another mistake. They found themselves on one of the secondary trails of the Caribbean descent, which could not lead them to the top of the mountain. 2 hours of fruitless wandering left the young women's psyche in a state of panic. Credibly, on the 1st of April 2014, Kris and Lisanne called emergency services from their cell phones. In Panama, dialing 911 or 112 is sufficient to call for emergency assistance. The first call was made by Kris at 4:39 p.m. to 112. Lisanne repeated the call, so the same number, at 16 hours 51 minutes. The girls were unable to establish contact with the caller, and this fact did not come as a shock to the young women. They realized that they were in the jungle, the vegetation of which creates a significant shielding effect for the implementation of both mobile and satellite communications GPS. Incidentally, the Canon SX270HS camera has a GPS function, but it was not enabled while the girls were traveling in Panama, and police tests of the camera confirm this conclusion. After unsuccessful attempts to contact the rescue service, the girls never made contact again. Perhaps, and logically, because of the energy conservation of their gadgets' battery packs. Besides, there was also a natural factor that limited Kris and Lisanne's activity. Sunset that day occurred at 6:40 p.m., and twilight came, which ended at 7:01 p.m., followed by nightfall. In the jungle, because of the vegetation, it starts to get dark much earlier and faster. Therefore, the girls had to take care of choosing the place to sleep in advance, and the first night was a nightmare for them. The cries of nocturnal predatory animals and the cries of birds disturbed for various reasons, the attacks of blood-sucking insects. I am sure that many people are familiar with the annoying buzzing of mosquitoes and their sudden bites while falling asleep or sleeping. Mysterious rustles caused by the nocturnal activity of other inhabitants of the rainforest, and chills caused by fear and cold. Even during the daytime, the jungle in this area is humid, and during the night hours, the natural temperature difference makes it even more so. As a result, the girls' light clothing quickly became soaked through. According to Miriam's daughter, the young women were wearing just such clothes, and the photos at the Mirador Mountain lookout fully confirm her words. Kris and Lisanne snuggled together to keep warm, and gradually the tired girls fell into a restless sleep. April 2nd, 2014. Jungle. The sun rose at 06 hours and 28 minutes on this day. Lisanne woke up while Kris was still asleep. At 6 hours and 58 minutes, she made a call to the emergency number 112, but there was no connection. At 8 hours and 14 minutes, Kris called the number. There was also no connection. The girls continued to search for a way to return home. The young women's outer clothing t-shirts had almost dried out, but their bras were still wet and were causing noticeable discomfort to the women's breasts. It was for this reason that they took them off and, folding them neatly, put them in a backpack, where they were later discovered. At 10:53 a.m., Lisanne called two numbers 112 and 911, to no avail. At 1:56 p.m., she tried 2 more times to call emergency services, in vain. After the calls made, the conditional image of battery power on the screen of Lisanne's gadget informed her of the low energy level of the power source. The girls did not make any more calls that day, deciding to conserve the energy potential of the smartphones, which remained the only hope of salvation for the young women. The second night in the jungle came, which was no less horrible than the previous one. April 3rd, 2014. The jungle. At 9:33 a.m., Kris tried to contact 911 for emergency services. There was no connection. Lisanne, aware of her cell phone's limited power reserves, at 1:50 p.m., performed a signal test check signal by simply pressing the device's power button and then turning it off after being informed that there was no mobile network coverage in the area. By the way, all actions with the gadget are automatically saved in the call log, function, or in the SIM card memory of any cell phone, and they can always be restored. For the experts of the police subsequently, it was not very difficult, and therefore the exact time of all manipulations of the girls with iPhone 4 and Samsung Galaxy is known. At 16 hours 00 minutes, Kris performed a signal test to determine if there was a connection. Unfortunately, there was none. At 4:19 p.m., Lisanne re-enabled her Samsung Galaxy, but got a negative result. These were the girls' last attempts to contact the civilized world that day before the third shocking night. April 4th, 2014. Jungle. At 10:16 a.m. and 1:42 p.m., Kris turned on her iPhone 4 only to determine if there was a connection to an emergency caller. Check signal dead space, no caller available. Lisanne did not make contact at all that day. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It's very important to us. April 5th, 2014. Jungle. At 4:50 hours, a check signal from Lisanne's smartphone followed. At 0500 hours, the device was turned on again, during which her Samsung Galaxy gadget most likely ran out of battery. It was for this reason that this girl's cell phone was never used again. Lisanne broke the unpleasant news to Kris, but with an enviable tenacity, the young women continued to search for a way home, but the jungle gave them an unexpected surprise that turned out to be a death trap. A deep, rocky ravine with a steep slope was safely hidden from view of the inexperienced travelers, and one careless movement a step forward, or to the right or left led to a fatal outcome. Both women fell to the bottom of the ravine, the depth of which was about 3.5 meters. Details of determining the height of the fall are below. And now let's visualize how this tragic event could have happened in reality, using the example of an episode from the movie Jurassic Park, Part 2. Time interval of the plot 1:15–1:15:20. Quite a plausible scenario of the development of the drama that happened to the girls in the jungle. After a fall, both young women suffered severe injuries. Kris was particularly badly injured. Her broken pelvic bone was later found. She was delirious or unconscious, and only faint, infrequent moans and intermittent breathing convinced Lisanne that her friend was still alive. Occasionally, Kris would ask for a drink. Understandably, water had to be saved, and the other girl had been pouring a small but adequate amount of liquid into her mouth from a plastic bottle later found empty in her backpack. Lisanne suffered a torn ligament at the junction of her left foot with the lower end of the tibia of her leg and crushed bones in her foot. There was no blood loss, as there was no skin damage, but the injury caused a hell of a lot of pain to the young woman. She was rendered unable to move around actively. Lisanne's shoe with the crushed remains of her foot was found in the jungle. Based on an analysis of the injuries sustained by both girls, it appears that the young women were unable to independently escape from the ravine into which they had fallen. April 6, 2014. Jungle. Lisanne's Samsung Galaxy smartphone was not working, and as such, she used Kris's gadget iPhone 4 to try to make contact with the emergency services. However, to activate this model of cell phone, it was necessary to enter a PIN code to unlock the device. The girl did not know it, and Kris could not communicate this information due to her confused, twilight state of consciousness. Therefore, at 10:26 a.m. and 1:37 p.m., the iPhone 4 was simply turned on and then turned off the smartphone check signal without entering the PIN. April 7, 2014. The law enforcement authorities of the city of Bouquet, based on the information stored in the gadgets, determined that the girls did not communicate on that day. April 8th, 9th and 10th, 2014. In the digital camera Canon SX270HS, found later 90 photos were found, taken on the night of April 8th in the period of time from 1 to 4. Some of the photographs have been published. No outgoing calls or activations from the only functioning smartphone during those 3 days were found by the Panamanian police. April 11th, 2014. The last signals for help. Lisanne was dying of hunger and cold, dehydration and pain shock. During these last hours of her life, she was constantly in delirium, but occasionally consciousness would return to her. It was at this point in time, at 10:51 a.m., that she managed to turn on her smartphone without entering the PIN code. Then, due to the lack of communication, she turned it off and again fell into a semi-delirium. At 11 hours and 56 minutes, the girl turned on the iPhone 4 for the last time, which worked in this mode continuously for 1 hour and 5 minutes, and turned off. According to the author of the publication, there is only one logical reason explaining this phenomenon. Lisanne lost consciousness after the second activation of the mobile device and soon died. And the switched-on smartphone worked exactly as long as it had enough energy resource of the battery. There was no one to make further calls because both girls were dead and the iPhone 4 and Samsung Galaxy smartphones were dead. Perhaps this is how the finale of this tragedy could have come about due to the young women's fall into the ravine on April 5, 2014. The search for Kris and Lisanne, or the remains of their bodies, continued, and soon blue denim shorts were found in the jungle, which searchers speculated could have belonged to Kris. However, it can be argued that it is not certain that this paraphernalia of women's outerwear was found at all, and that it belonged to the missing girl. The evidence is there. First, according to members of the rescue team, the shorts were found on a large rock near a water stream. By the way, the date of their discovery is still unknown. They were clean, dry, and zipped up, but that's not the main point. Didn't a single person from the volunteer squad have a camera, or at least a cell phone, to photograph this important find? Certainly a photograph would have confirmed the discovery of the evidence and, moreover, would have indicated the location of the clothing with a geo-referenced location. However, no such photograph exists. And this is strange, given that the expedition was led by an experienced guide, who was well aware and even warned by the police about the need to record any finds on photo or video materials during search operations. Secondly, logically, the found item should certainly have been handed over to the police for research, and naturally, law enforcement officers would have photographed the found item and had it examined. For example, there is a photo of the backpack and the things that were in it. The results of their fingerprinting have been published. However, in the investigative materials there is no photo of blue jean shorts, and there are no expert materials, at least no biological analysis of the evidence belonging to the unfortunate girl. A third, very serious argument. It is unbelievable that Kris, having left her shorts behind, could go in search of a trail to return home in only fishnet panties in the jungle wilds filled with swarms of blood-drinking insects and vegetation, the branches and leaves of which would certainly cause painful damage to the unprotected skin of the upper part of delicate female legs. If it is fake, the question arises who and for what purpose was interested in spreading false information. For example, the guide Feliciano was suspiciously active in the search for missing young women unknown to him. He coordinated the work of several search groups. It is possible that members of a rescue expedition may have conspired to falsify the discovery of the blue jean shorts in order to receive a cash reward for information about the missing girls. The further into the jungle you go, the more mysteries there are. When a targeted search for a missing person or a disappeared group of people is conducted, no matter where, in the jungle, in the mountains, in European or North American forests, professional trackers usually find various traces of human activity. That's what happened on April 10th, 2014. A polyethylene bag with a plastic container from used food products and a boot insole. Screenshot from video footage taken by searchers and provided by them to the police, along with the finds. The items were found in the jungle near the village of Los Naranjos, located 5 kilometers from the city of Bokeh. It can be argued, and police experts have rightly come to the same conclusion, that the finds have nothing to do with the disappearance of Kris and Lisanne, based on the fact that they were found almost at a considerable distance from the Sendero El Pianista trail. Unfortunately, tourists do not always care about preserving the natural environment. The search for the girls continued, and shortly after the discovery of the backpack on June 11, 2014, new evidence was found, giving hope for solving the tragedy. June 18, 2014. The left shoe is blue in color. Police determined that shoes of this color were not present in the closet of either girl, and so investigators rightly did not recognize this attribute as belonging to the missing young women. Accidentally or not, both shoes were discovered by guide Feliciano and his team of searchers. But that's not all. In August 2014, members of the rescue operations found various bone fragments located at a relatively small distance from each other in the vicinity of the settlement of Altos del Romero, where guide Feliciano owned coffee plantations. Small fragments of bones, among which was a human rib. It was determined that the rib belonged to Kris. Some shattered bone remains belonged to Lisanne. All the evidence found undoubtedly proved that the young women were dead. Further search operations were therefore deemed inappropriate, and the search was therefore terminated. In October 2014, the Panamanian judiciary closed the investigation with the verdict that Kris and Lisanne had gotten lost and died from exposure to natural factors. However, despite this official conclusion, there are still hypotheses about the violent death of the girls. The murder was committed by a sex maniac. There are numerous studies that are devoted to the phenomenon of a serial killer. On the basis of expert data, a conventional classification of such crimes has been developed, and in accordance with it, the principal behavioral model of the perpetrator. A sexual maniac is characterized by an attack only on a single victim, usually in the dark, in relatively deserted places and in the area familiar to the killer, which provides him with the opportunity to quickly and secretly leave the scene of the crime. The perpetrator acts from the victim's back so that the victim cannot see his face. He uses strangulation techniques to deprive the subject of consciousness. Grabbing the throat with his hand, a rope, wire, or something suitable thrown around the neck in some cases, the maniac gives a preliminary blow to the head with a stone, stick, or some other object to immobilize the woman. The sexual maniac has a heightened sense of self-preservation, and therefore he always kills the victim and leaves practically no traces, except for his semen. The search for the criminal on the basis of this biological evidence often does not lead to a quick and accurate identification of the rapist, and moreover, sometimes because of investigative errors suffer innocent people who are sentenced to long terms of imprisonment in prison, and even the death penalty. Based on the above-mentioned signs of sexual assault, let us analyze the behavior of the perpetrator in relation to the disappeared girls. First, this individual would not have attacked two girls at the same time during daylight hours, when there was a possibility that one of the young women might well have escaped from the killer, and then reported the crime to the police with a description of the attacker's features. Secondly, why would the perpetrator go into the jungle, where he himself could have lost his spatial orientation and failed to find his victims? It would have been much easier for this psychopath to attack the girls in the city of Bouquet or near the location of the women's residence when they were returning in the evening, for example, from some youth entertainment center or club. And now the most important and irrefutable argument: sexual crimes in this region were not registered neither before the appearance of Kris and Lisanne nor after their disappearance, and in this regard, the version of a maniac in general becomes irrelevant. Murdered to get the organs of girls for sale. Transplantation of organs of a deceased person to another person to save his or her life is a permissible operation and strictly regulated by law in many countries of the world community. The main requirements are the availability of highly qualified personnel and appropriate medical equipment with the use of authorized preserving agents to ensure the safety of the extracted organs. To transport organic material to various remote surgical centers, a special container is used that operates from power sources to maintain a temperature microclimate within the range of 0.4 degrees Celsius. As a rule, the guaranteed period of effective suitability of organs for transplantation currently does not exceed 74 hours. In case of violation of storage or transportation conditions, biological material irreversibly starts to deteriorate, and as a result, its use for surgery is contraindicated. Let us analyze the possibility of dissecting the bodies of girls in the jungle. Based on the evidence discovered, the disappearance of Kris and Lisanne occurred in a remote highland area of Panama on the border of the provinces of Bocas del Toro and Chiriqui. A backpack containing items belonging to young women was found near the settlement of Altos del Romero. The landscape in the photograph gives an unhappy impression. There is absolutely no certainty that qualified medical professionals capable of performing various complex surgical procedures could have lived and worked there in 2014. The Altos del Romero settlement and other similar settlements in the region are still not electrified and do not have autonomous plants for generating electrical energy. which is necessary for the operation of special refrigerated chambers that provide conditions for the preservation of biological material. Moreover, in the jungles of this area, except for narrow paths known only to local residents, there are no transportation communications. Therefore, the delivery of human organic material to medical facilities in various cities of Panama, and even more so beyond the borders of that country, could not be accomplished within a limited time frame. No one will pay money for the rotten kidneys, liver, spleen, and other biological elements of a human corpse. Based on an analysis of the peculiarities of the geographical location and infrastructure of the territory in question, it is acceptable to draw a clear conclusion that conditions for the extraction of the organs of girls in the jungle and their subsequent transit were practically non-existent. Other hypotheses for the disappearance of the girls. Criminals kidnapped young women to sell them into sexual slavery. Or it was a robbery in order to take possession of Kris and Lisanne's valuables. There is speculation that the girls encountered drug couriers in the jungle, and they destroyed them as unwanted witnesses to the discovery of local drug trafficking. However, stop fantasizing. There is physical evidence that disproves these and any other criminal versions of Kris and Lisanne's murder in the jungles of Panama. The evidence was found in a backpack belonging to the young women. They are money, smartphones, and a digital camera, $83. An intruder or a group of criminal elements would certainly have seized them, but this did not happen, and this is the first fact. The Samsung Galaxy smartphones, the iPhone 4, and the Canon SX270HS camera were modern, expensive gadgets in 2014. There is no doubt that they would have been stolen by criminals either for personal use or for the purpose of selling them. However, that also did not happen, and that is fact 2. Third fact. The found cell phones and camera were neatly wrapped with Scotch tape, on the adhesive backing of which the police later found 3 fingerprints. The logical question is, why would the killers of young women staple these devices together in this way and then leave them in a backpack? Nonsense. The arguments presented above convincingly indicate that there is no indication that the girls were attacked for both criminal and other motives. By the way, we can explain who wrapped the smartphones and camera with duct tape and for what purpose. This was done by a woman who found Kris and Lisanne's bag in a rice field near Altos del Romero and brought it to her house. In order to prevent the possibility of theft of these items separately by curious neighbors who came to look at the found items, and in the minds of some of them may well have been tempted to do so, the woman prudently attached the gadgets with adhesive tape and did the right thing, thus ensuring the safety of evidence for the Panamanian police. Thanks to her actions, the investigating authorities subsequently found irrefutable photographic evidence in the smartphones, confirming the journey of Kris and Lisanne to the top of Mount Mirador on April 1, 2014. And the Canon SX270HS camera contained 90 photographs taken on the night of April 8, 2014. The Panamanian police and experts in the Netherlands, in compliance with the law on investigative secrecy, have never made these photographs available to the media, but they did appear on the internet, and the original sources who posted them there have not yet been identified. Several conclusions can be drawn from the analysis of this photo. Most likely, a steep slope of the cliff is depicted here. The photo is made in perspective from bottom to top with the deviation of the camera lens to the right of the vertical, and the plants in the frame confirm this perspective, because they grow in the direction of sunlight coming from the sky, and therefore, the dark background in the photo is the night sky. By the way, closer to the upper edge of the photo, you can see something in the form of a faint light dot, which most likely looks like a raindrop or a drop of night dew. All the details of this image could have fallen into the camera lens only under the condition that the person who took the picture was in the lying down position at the bottom of the gorge, and the author of the publication has clues that allow to confirm this assumption and establish the identity of the photographer. The maximum capture of the illuminated space by the digital camera Canon SX270HS flash is 3.5 meters, and based on this, it is possible to estimate the depth of the ravine, into which the young women fell at least 3 meters. Injuries sustained by both girls during the fall prevented them from standing. One had a broken pelvic bone, the other had a shattered left foot, and these injuries, as later determined by the expert examination, were of lifetime origin. Further, based on a comparison of the severity of injuries to the musculoskeletal system of the human body, it can be argued that Kris was the most severely injured, while Lisanne still retained the ability to perform minor active actions. And for this reason, she may well have been the author of the night photographs. Proof. This young woman even attempted to capture her face in a photographic frame, but the self-photography attempt with a Canon SX270HS camera did not achieve the desired result. There is no selfies function in this device. It is quite obvious that the image was out of focus and backlit due to the small distance between the flash and the subject. Nevertheless, there is detail in the upper right of this shot that looks very much like hair. The assumption was made that a fragment of Lisanne's face was recorded in the photograph, and there is convincing confirmation of this version. The coincidence is 100%. Consequently, Lisanne was alive, capable of acting, but because of a foot injury limited in her movements on the bottom of the ravine. And it was she who took all 90 night photos, because Kris in the night of April 8th, 2014 was already dead, and the proof of this fact is a photo frame of the dead girl's face, covered by her red hair. On close examination of this image, one can consider the left sinus of the nose, blue arrow, the profile of the upper lip, green arrow, the left eye socket, black arrow, the tip of the left earlobe, orange arrow with the earring, red arrow, and the left upper part of the girl's cheekbone, purple arrow. Anatomically proportional arrangement of these elements relative to each other on the photo quite corresponds to the facial appearance of a person of European race. And it is possible to indicate the most probable reason which made Lisanne to cover Kris' face with her hair before photographing. It was the photographer's desire to hide this part of the dead girl's head because it was partially disfigured by the trauma of falling into the ravine and probably distorted by death convulsions. And this site is not for faint-hearted people. Kris most likely died on April 8th, 2014 at around 0100 hours or a little later. Certainly shocked by her friend's death, Lisanne, left alone, without water and food supplies, in wet clothes that caused her body to become permanently hypothermic, doomed to imminent doom unless a miracle occurred, which it never did, was in a state of hysteria. In desperation, the young woman took a digital camera out of her backpack and began taking photos. It is quite obvious that the light round dots are flash-lit raindrops falling from the night sky dark shade in the photo against the background of vegetation growing over the ravine greenish shade in the photo. And now let us present the photographs, which confirm that Lisanne was unable to stand due to a leg injury. And for this reason, she took the photographs in the lying on her back position at the bottom of the ravine, practically without changing her position. The above photos have in common a characteristic fragment in the form of a bright backlight, which could only occur when a raindrop hits the flash screen when photographing in a bottom-up direction. Who doubts in this statement can try to photograph in a similar angle, not very strong rain in any place, and not necessarily in a jungle, for example, on a plot of land near your house, and do not be afraid to get dirty and wet if you are interested in the result of such an experiment. Another peculiarity of the presented photos is very short time intervals between the photos from 1 minute to 3 minutes. This circumstance allows us to conclude that Lisanne was in a panic state and, as a result, pressed the shutter of the camera at a feverish pace. This assumption is supported by other nighttime photographs taken at similar time intervals from the same angle. Note that in these and other night photos there is a natural landmark in the form of a trunk or branch of vegetation. Unfortunately, By this detail of the image, it has not yet been possible to identify the place where the photograph was taken. The girls who fell into the ravine had hoped to be searched for by search teams and even possibly using the airlift of the rescue service. Kris was unable to move at all due to a broken pelvic bone, which is why Lisanne, overcoming the pain in her shattered foot, attempted to mark their location in the jungle, using available means to make signal markers that she thought could be seen from the height of search planes or helicopters. It was most likely made from fragments of material from a torn red-colored plastic bag, and no doubt they were secured in some way to a branch so that they would not be carried away by a random gust of wind. The presence of household containers of exactly this color in the girls' daily household activities in Panama has confirmation. One of several red plastic bags found by police in Kris and Lisanne's room after their disappearance. The question arises as to why this polyethylene container, from which the signaling landmark was made, was in the girl's backpack. There is an answer. The red bag contained the remnants of a delicious and hearty breakfast that Miriam had prepared for the young women on April 1st, 2014, and that they had taken to satisfy their hunger while climbing to the top of Mirador Mountain. But the contents of the tourist bag were not limited to that. There was a plastic bottle filled with drinking water to quench thirst in the jungle. It was found empty in the backpack. Of course, the girls took toilet paper on the trip. For women, it is an indispensable attribute of personal hygiene in modern hiking conditions, by the way, and for men also. Given that Kris and Lisanne were hiking without a guide, they no doubt had a map of the area with the Sendero el Pianista trail marked on it for insurance against getting lost. It is likely that there was also an additional food product packaged in a cylindrical paper tube with metal lids on both sides. For example, in 2014, potato chips, Pringles, Lay's, Estrella were packed in such packaging. And now we will provide evidence that all these things were present in the girl's backpack, and Lisanne used them to make another signaling sign. Paper is most likely a roll of white toilet paper unwrapped by Lisanne and placed by the girl on the surface of the rock, mirror, or reflective object. The irregularities around the perimeter of this object clearly indicate a metal lid torn off by Lisanne from a paper tube that contained a product like chips. This is the strap of the backpack, but the main and most of it did not get in the frame. In addition, Kris and Lisanne took their identity documents and a small amount of money on the hike just in case later found inside the hiking bag. Based on the arguments presented, it can be concluded that all of the items in question were present in the girl's backpack, and some of them were used by Lisanne to make distress signals. In fact, this confirms that the young women's decision to go on the trip was not a spontaneous or frivolous act. On the contrary, everything points to a carefully planned hike to the top of Mirador. The element of mysticism in this tragic story. Kris and Lisanne were severely traumatized after falling into a ravine and were unable to climb out on their own. There, in the ravine, death caught up with them. Kris died on the night of April 8th. Photo with red hair covering the appearance of her face. The second girl died on April 11th, shortly after turning on her iPhone 4 smartphone without entering a PIN at 11:56 a.m. The second girl died on April 11th. The activated cell phone had operated for 1 hour, and it is likely that only Lisanne's death prevented her from turning that device off in time to conserve the energy potential of the power source, and as such, the smartphone's battery was depleted. If both girls had died in the ravine, then naturally their backpack had to be located there as well, near the bodies of the deceased young women. The hiking bag was made of a combination of materials of two contrasting colors. This is evident from the police photograph, and its part, marked as strap in the above photo, was caught in the lens of Lisanne's camera. This circumstance irrefutably points to the fact that the backpack was present in the gorge. However, somehow it ended up near the settlement of Altos del Romero on the flat, dry surface of a rice plantation plot of land. It was found on June 11th, 2014, by a woman who worked daily in that rice field. Panamanian police officials suggested that the backpack had been carried there by the flow of a river that still runs through the vicinity of this farmland. And this police theory would be true if rice in Panama were grown in the same way as in Japan, China, and other Southeast Asian countries, i.e., in crop fields that are permanently or forcibly flooded by river water. In the territory where Kris and Lisanne disappeared, the rice crop is reproduced using a completely different technology, which has an agrarian term, the dry land method. The grains of this plant are planted in dry open ground, just as it happens when sowing maize seeds, wheat or potato tubers. There is no need to use river water to constantly moisten the soil in this Latin American country, because the amount of rainfall during the rainy season is sufficient for the growth and maturation of this food product. That is why the tourist bag could not have been carried to the rice plantation by the flow of the river, and the following arguments are additional evidence for the presented assertion. Firstly, the backpack and the belongings in it were completely dry. Secondly, there were 34 fingerprints on the items found. The river water would certainly have destroyed them. Thirdly, in the gadgets of the girls were found photographic materials of good enough quality. There is no doubt that the penetration of moisture into smartphones and digital cameras would have led to the failure of all electronic systems of these devices and to the impossibility of further obtaining any information from them. Consequently, the river has nothing to do with the appearance of the girl's backpack in the rice field, and another realistic assumption arises, devoid of any mystical basis. It was planted there. Based on the location of the evidence found near the village of Altos del Romero, the most likely conclusion is that the backpack was planted by a resident of the village. He accidentally found the place where Kris and Lisanne were killed in the jungle and, looking in the tourist bag out of curiosity, found $83, cell phones, a camera, bras, and sunglasses. The desire to appropriate the found items was great, and it prevailed over this man's mind. Money does not smell, gadgets can be sold, and the bras and sunglasses can be given, for example, to his wife or mistress. It was for this purpose that he stole the backpack and did not inform anyone about the find. He waited until the search for the missing girls was over so that he could safely use the money he found and the financial profit from the sale of smartphones and a digital camera. However, the investigation into the disappearance of Kris and Lisanne was gaining momentum. The search area was expanding. The number of rescue teams was increasing, and even search dogs were used. And when the event caused an international resonance, the robber panicked. If he showed the police the backpack he had found, investigators would force him to point out the place where the girl's hiking bag was found. And there, in the ravine, the bodies or already decomposed remains of the dead young women would be found. Certainly he would be charged with willful concealment of physical evidence and involvement in a robbery murder. This individual realized that the Panamanian court, in order to close the high-profile criminal case as soon as possible, would not go into the details of his actions and intentions and would sentence him to death. Times were tough for the resident of the Altos del Romero settlement, and in the mind of this terrified man there was the obvious and only solution: get rid of the backpack. On the night of June 11th, 2014, the rogue kidnapper went to a rice paddy and left the hiking bag with money, gadgets, and other items. In the afternoon, the backpack was found by a woman. By the way, she told the police that he was not at the plantation on June 10th, and her report confirms the version of planting the evidence at night on June 11th. Naturally, the perpetrator was not seen, and so the identity of this man from Altos del Romero has not yet been established. And even if he confessed on his deathbed to the priest about the theft of Kris and Lisanne's backpack, which is a violation of God's 8th commandment, "Thou shalt not steal," the church representative certainly kept his confession secret. In this regard, no one will ever know about the sinful act of the dying man, and the name of the sinner will forever remain unknown to the laity. The discovered human remains give evidence. Forensic experts determined, on the basis of DNA analysis, that the bone fragments found belonged to the young women who had disappeared, and this irrefutably confirmed their deaths. The biological materials were not found in one specific location, but scattered over a limited area of the jungle. This circumstance can be explained. For example, the main predators of the fauna of Panama, belonging to the cat family, feed on the flesh of the victims of their hunts, but they are not afraid to eat fresh organic remains of animals that have died for various reasons. And even the meat of a dead person would not be an exception for them. Therefore, they could very well have scattered some parts of Kris and Lisanne's bodies to eat them quietly away from where the girls had died. The scattered location of the bones of the young women in the jungle allows for this possibility. Examination of Kris's pelvic bone showed no traces of damage from predators' teeth or fangs, and the superficial layer of bone tissue in this part of the girl's skeleton showed an elevated phosphate content. Experts could not establish the reasons for the origin of these anomalies, but the answers exist and have an objective justification. Panama's felines are not large in size, and their jaws are functionally adapted only to eat the available soft part of the flesh, but they cannot nibble or crush large bones. That's why no teeth marks were found on the fragment of Kris's pelvic bone. And further, on the abandoned remnants of the meal rushed legions of fall flies, for which the remaining meat fibers were a source of food and a great environment for reproduction. In such a biological mass, each individual, depending on the species, is capable of laying at one time 100-2,300 eggs, from which on average after a day appear larvae. They actively consume organic material, leaving behind eventually completely bare bone, without any traces of damage, because the teeth of the larvae are absent. Fall fly larvae on a decomposing corpse, which also emanates a nauseating odor of decay. They make a ghastly impression even on pathologists. Visually, these creatures are similar to small fat worms of white, yellow or gray color up to 20 millimeters long, and their active swarming in the rotting flesh of a dead person is reliably represented in some horror films. Fly larvae go through 3 stages of development, and in each of them, extraintestinal digestion is characteristic of these devourers of carrion. What's that? They secrete copious amounts of aggressive digestive mucus into the surrounding biological environment through their outer shell. These secretions ensure digestion of organics followed by absorption of the liquefied substance through the toothless oral cavity of the larvae. Phosphate compounds are present in the composition of mucus, as in human saliva and in the digestive system. They take an active part in chemical reactions of protein masses cleavage, but at the same time they can penetrate at the ionic level into the surface layer of any bone tissue and remain there unchanged for a long time. It is for this reason that an abnormal concentration of phosphates was found in the pelvic part of Kris's skeleton. This is definitely a trace of the impact of phosphate digestive enzymes of blowfly larvae on her bone. Conclusion. N. The main circumstance that contributed to the disappearance of Kris and Lisanne in the jungles of Panama can be summarized very succinctly: a miser pays twice. The girls ignored the warnings of the locals about the dangers of unguided excursions and refused the paid services of a guide, most likely to save money. And for this savings, in the end, they paid with their lives. At the top of Mirador Mountain, due to the lack of a professional guide, the girls misjudged the direction to return home. 2 hours after this tragic mistake, they realized they were lost in the jungle. The abundant rainforest vegetation where they were located created a shielding effect that prevented the young women from using their cell phones to contact Panama's emergency services. One section of the trail later proved to be a trap. A thicket of plants hid the edge of a steep ravine from Kris and Lisanne's view, and the girls' attention was lost due to fatigue and panic. So they unexpectedly fell into a ravine more than 3 meters deep, receiving serious injuries to the human musculoskeletal system, and which did not allow them to get out of this position. The young women had virtually no chance of rescue due to the lack of cellular communication, and the creation of 2 warning signs of their distressed location was in vain. Because the search for the missing girls by aircraft of the Panamanian Rescue Service was never planned and therefore never carried out. And then physical factors and natural conditions, pain, shock from injuries, starvation, dehydration and hypothermia from overnight rainfall finished off the unfortunate women and caused their deaths. American money, cell phones and a digital camera found in the girls' backpack after their deaths unequivocally proved the fact that there were no criminal motives for the destruction of Kris and Lisanne. Nothing was stolen. The verdict of the Panamanian prosecutor's office on the cause of death of the young women in the jungle is beyond doubt the disaster was an accident. The poor women went missing in 2014, but hundreds of people go missing every year. It is sad that people's vacations end in tragedy. Take care. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the like. Take care.